Grosser, Larry O'Brien, Ed O'Neill, Nando, and Mondo. Are you guys here? Anyone here? Okay. Great. Okay, thank you guys. You can look on this board and see what the airplane looked like 3 months ago. It's an unbelievable transformation. This airplane has never looked so good since it rolled out of the plane at Farmingdale in 1961. And after that, it always had bug marks on it. So this is the best looking Thud you'll find anywhere. I was going to go first because there's really no way I can follow Tom Kirk. This man is a recipient of the Air Force Cross. That's just below the name. I'm going to give you some details about the airplane, then I'll tell a war story, and then I'll read a poem that'll really be hard. What you see behind me is the world's largest single-engine, single-seat fighter ever made. World's largest single-engine, single-seat fighter. It was truly an honor to be selected to fly such a wonderful machine. I was in the last class of first lieutenants at Nellis to go through and get a checkout, and we went directly to Tockley. We arrived there in December 1966, and there were more lieutenant colonels flying the Thud than first lieutenants. It was a senior pilot's airplane. But they were losing guys right and left, so they need to bring in some fresh blood. There were 495 D models available at the start of the war in 1967. 4 years later, after 397 of those 495, that leaves 98 D models in the world. So we lost 80% of the airplanes in 4 years. When the lieutenants with me arrived at Tockley, they took us into base operations of a fairly nondescript military building, and there were 2 4x8 plaques on the wall. One was labeled 100 missions, and one was labeled POW MIA KIA. And interestingly enough, they had name tags for all the people from Tockley at that time. There were about the same number of name tags on both lists. And so we looked at each other and said, you know, this is a 50-50 deal. Nobody told us that. There was a story of a newly arrived major who was shot down and recovered out on his first mission. I've got it written down so I don't have time to think about anything. When asked how he felt, he observed sagely, I don't know if I can stand another 99 of these. How about this? A really optimistic Thud pilot actually stopped smoking because he thought it would be detrimental to his health. This airplane was known for some of the longest takeoff rolls in history. Someone asked me, wouldn't it be nice if we could fly it here? We can't. 8,000 feet of runway before you lift off the nose, and then you're 210 knots, 230 miles an hour. The folks around here who bitch about airplane noise would be climbing the fences. Somebody said that if you build a runway all the way around the world, Republic would build an aircraft that would use every inch of it. The takeoff and landing speeds were the same as the SR-71, the Blackbird, 230 miles an hour. Max speed was Mach 2.08, nearly 1,400 miles an hour. And more than 2,000 105D and F-105G, which was the two-seater version, sorties were launched from March 65 to December 72 from 2 bases in Thailand. Early D models had an infrequent but really kind of nasty habit of blowing up in flight. Thus how they got the name Thud. This was caused by poor airflow around the engine and resulted in these little inlets here on the side. We call them rabbit ears on the side of the fuselage up by the stars and bars, and that provided cooling air back to the rear end of the aircraft so that we stopped blowing ourselves up. There was even a story that some invented MiG pilots simply followed a Thud around in the sky until it blew up so they could log a kill. The Thud's conventional bomb load capability of up to 15,000 pounds was 3 times heavier than those of World War II's 4-engine heavy bombers as the B-17 and the B-24. A typical 3.5-hour mission from Thailand involved pre- and post-strike refueling en route to the Hanoi area, which was 700 nautical miles north. Once in the target area, which was labeled Route Pack 6 on our maps, we encountered what, as you heard Colonel Kirk mention, the most heavily defended area in the history of aerial warfare. The enemy had MiG, SAMs, and dense anti-aircraft fire ready to send up to us. 2 F-105 Wild Weasel pilots earned the Medal of Honor. Major Merle Bethelson, that was a good job, and Major Leo Thorstens. Both were squadron mates of mine and flew out of the 357th. And I'm so proud that the museum has chosen to communicate the tail markings of the 357 and it's a patch on the other side for this aircraft. My most memorable flight was July 2nd, 1967, my 96th mission. It was a two-ship with a major on his first mission over North Vietnam. Everything went okay until I dropped my bombs. In the pull-up, I looked back and saw a new black cloud at about 6,000 feet, right where I had just flown. The wingman flew through the cloud trying to hit the same target, came out with a major fire. I told him head west as he could not make it to the ocean 40 miles to the east. And there was a lot of bad guys on the ground that direction. West was toward sparsely populated mountains. After about 2 minutes, the fire was moving toward the cockpit, about halfway up the aircraft, and I directed him to bail out. He did so, but it was doing about 500 knots, and there was a heavy, heavy whiplash involved in going from in the ambient air of the cockpit to 500 knot right in your face air. The chute opened, and he landed on a hillside, fairly rugged hill, but it was tree covered, and the chute hung up in the top of a tree. I immediately went over to guard and said, "Mayday, mayday, mayday, Bark Barracuda 2 is down." They responded. They would send a helicopter to try to recover him, and I looked at my gas gauge and realized I needed to fill up to be there for the half-hour wait for the helicopter. So I went out and hit a tanker and came back. When I got there, I got back on the guard frequency, or the rescue frequency, and the guy said, "Well, the helicopter's taking a lot of intense fire from the ground. They're going to have to turn around and go home." I said to myself, this can't happen. So I said, "Get me on the same frequency with the helicopter." I asked them to do a hold down, which let me see a bearing pointer to where they were. I flew out to them. They were, it's sort of like this, the countryside here, not quite as the rugged hills, but they were tree covered. And the helicopter was about 10 miles south of the town of Vinh, which anyone remembers was heavily, heavily defended. Lots of guys, the Navy guys saw it a lot, but nobody wanted to be flying around Vinh. But the helicopter got 10 miles south. I was flying around about 6,000 feet. The helicopter's 1,000 feet. He's got 150 knot max speed, and I've got to get him back to where I just came from. So I slowed down, put down half flaps, flew around at 250 knots at about 1,500 feet, which is traffic pattern altitude. And to this day, I was doing S turns in front of them because I had to fly a longer string so that they could stay with me and take him back to where he was. And I do not know to this day why I was not shot down. At 1,500 feet in 105 at 250 knots, I mean, I was ripe for picking. I think I may have caught the enemy gunners on a rice break. So anyway, we got to him, and I said, "Here he is." I lit the burner and pulled up. Helicopter hovered over and dropped down a tree penetrator to where he was in the tree. And they said, "He's not responding. He's not reaching out. You have to grab it and not strap around yourself." So I said, "Well, we're not going to leave him there." I said, "Why don't you send down somebody on the ground to hook him up?" They put down a pair of rescuemen, and he was able to get him out. That young man who hit the ground there. Interestingly enough, this helicopter was on their last flight in the war from the ship. They were going home the next day. But this young pair of rescuemen who went on the ground, risked his life, hooked him up, took him away, got the Navy Cross. So I'm very proud to know that young man. I'm going to close with a poem written in 1969 by Gene Sorello. He was a Tockley 100 mission pilot. Okay, I got to tell myself a good joke here. When time passes on and we have reached the twilight of our lives, I shall hearken back to 100 flights in those war-torn Asian skies. And once again I'll hear that roar of a burner, blast of cannon, and screech of tires. Through weak and misty eyes in vain I will look and search the skies for those wingmen no longer here. And always my heart, my soul, and my memory will take me back, perhaps to Quang Tree, perhaps Dong Hoi, but always I know to those wingmen from Tok Lake. Thank you very much.